In the first half of 2025, Africa and Central Asia saw record investment from China's Belt and Road Initiative. As engagement and construction expand in both regions, will more nations seek to join the initiative? But first, BRICS members have expressed deep concerns over U.S. policies on trade and tariffs, which Brazilian President Lula called unjustified and illegal. To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Beijing, Einar Tangen is a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and founder of Asia Narratives on Substack. And we're joined from Sao Paulo in Brazil by André Perfeito. He is a Brazilian economist. Thanks to both of you for being with us. André, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Let me start with you. The Brazilian President Lula, he called for an emergency meeting to discuss the U.S. policies on trade and tariffs. In fact, President Lula said tariff blackmail is being normalized as an instrument to conquer markets and interfere in domestic affairs. Those are very tough words. What do you make of them?
Well, it's tough words, but what Donald Trump did with Brazil, it's also tough. He sent a letter and saying that he's going to make a 40%, more 40% tariffs on Brazil just because he wants to see the former president Jair Bolsonaro out of jail and out of charge. And it's completely insane what Donald Trump did here, because the president of Brazil, Lula, cannot have any interference in the judiciary system. The Supreme Court in Brazil right now is make the trial of Jair Bolsonaro, and it's going to run as it never happened, the Trump tariff, because they have liberty to do so, the Supreme Court. So it's a very strange situation that we're facing right now in Brazil, especially with these movements of Donald J. Trump.
Einar Tangen, Chinese President Xi Jinping, he also gave a speech at the virtual summit. He called, and that speech was called Forging Ahead in Solidarity and Cooperation. During the summit, he laid out a three-point proposal, a call to uphold multilateralism, to defend international fairness and justice, openness and win-win cooperation to safeguard the international economic and trade order, and solidarity and cooperation to foster synergy for common development. These, of course, are very broad goals. They set the tone for what China is trying to achieve. What do you make of China's priorities?
Well, China's priorities are really about the global south. It's not just BRICS. The BRICS nations are 10 nations who actually represent most of the powers. Well, I shouldn't say most. They're representative of those who suffered under colonialism. And they now want a multilateral system that is fair. What you have is Donald Trump saying that he wants to impose unilateral tariffs in a kind of cynical game reminiscent of the colonial times, where he tries to get countries to fight against each other in order to please America and make America, quote, great again. This is not something that any of these countries want to see. They understand that Trump is acting as a bully. And the question is, how can you bring about a realistic change? And the only way you can do that is to have certain principles. Xi Jinping outlined those in the past. He's talked about the security initiative, the development initiative, the civilization initiative, and then most recently, he's talked about the governance initiative, which is global governance initiative, which is really important because it pulls together these strands and says, you know, rather than having lots and lots of different organizations, what needs to happen is for countries to get behind the UN and to do what is necessary to bring in those who are willing, and those who are not, they can sit out.
André, this is what the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa told the virtual summit. Let's listen.
Unilateral tariff actions are contributing to an increasingly protectionist environment, which poses great hardships and danger for the countries of the global south. The uncertainty of the new trading regime has already negatively affected employment levels in my own country, South Africa, and is an obstacle to our economic growth.
So, André, there you have President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about hardships and danger. Could you give us a sense of the risk these tariffs pose to developing economies like that in South Africa?
Well, what we can see here in Brazil right now, that after the tariffs of the United States tariff on Brazil, our external sector, our trade balance had a surplus. So what I'm really not worried, but what I'm wondering is if this tariffs not bring a new world for us, for the global South. So what we're going to see that Brazil and China, and Brazil and South Africa, and many countries of this global South is going to do more trade between themselves. So it's a mixed feeling, because as a superpower, United States not what it used to be, and in matter of fact, the United States facing a really big problem right now. What we see about the tariffs of Donald Trump, we can see a little bit of madness what he's doing. We can say like that. But what they are trying to tackle is the problem in the current account of the United States. They are running huge deficits in the current account. So they need to balance that, but they don't know how to do that. And they decided not to do that in an organized manner. They decided to make tariffs and bully all the other countries trying to make the best for them. It's not a good way to do that. It's not the proper way. So leadership of China, Brazil, South Africa, and the BRICS countries, but mainly the global South, is needed right now to bring more balance and more reason to this kind of global governance that we are facing right now.
Einar, Tangen, all the leaders of BRICS were at this virtual summit, with the exception of the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. But still, when we see all these nations getting together, what is the message that sends to not just the United States, but to the world?
Well, it's a dynamic group. You know, it's quite a contrast to what's happening with the United States as it withdraws its support for multinational lateral institutions. China is involved in many groups that are extremely vital. They're expanding, and that includes SCO. It includes the Belt and Road Initiative, RCEP, and of course, BRICS. So it's not just that they are very popular. The message here is that in the absence of the United States, in terms of supporting the multinational, multilateral world, that the rest of the countries are going to do what is necessary. And whether that involves having currencies that aren't subject to weaponization by the United States, or settlement abilities that are not related to the United States, or having more trade amongst themselves and de-risking themselves from the US market, this is inevitable. And this is really what keeps Washington and Donald Trump up at night. The idea that there's a much larger power out there that, if it coalesces, could in fact make Washington come to reasonable terms and understand that they have to work with the world rather than try to rule it.
Einar, as I said, India's leader was not at this virtual summit. The country was represented by its External Affairs Minister, also sometimes called the Foreign Minister, S. Jaishankar, and this is what he told the summit. Let's listen.
The world requires constructive and cooperative approaches to promote trade that is sustainable. Increasing barriers and complicating transactions will not help. Neither would the linking of trade measures to non-trade matters. The BRICS itself can set an example by reviewing trade flows among its member states.
Now, India has been hit with 50% tariffs, but it's a country which is trying to straddle two broad groups here. On the one hand, there's BRICS. At the same time, it's trying to maintain a very close strategic and diplomatic, as well as economic relationship with the United States. Can that work?
Well, a lot depends on Donald Trump. I mean, I've been on a number of Indian television stations over the last couple of weeks, approximately over 30. And the message is very clear. They're looking for some way to take advantage of the situation. And you see that with Modi not attending a virtual summit. Sending Jaishankar is not the same as him appearing, kind of undermines at least the optics of what we saw at the SCO. Hopefully that will change. Now, you'll note that there were some words, offhanded words by Donald Trump saying that, oh, don't worry, India and the US will work it out. And then all of a sudden, Modi wasn't coming. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump the next day said, oh, by the way, I want Europe to, in essence, put 100% tariffs on India to, force them to give up their oil trade, which is kind of senseless since it's Europe that's getting the oil from India. And without that oil, prices would rise there. So, there's not a lot of clarity on what's going on here. And I think that India is going to have to think through whether they want to have a trust relationship with similar countries who have similar aims, or they want to play kind of a game between the United States and others.
André, BRICS members have stressed the need for what they call an open global economy. What does that look like?
Well, when it comes to the global trade and what's happening right now to the world, the attitude of Donald J. Trump, and we need to stress that, because it's not the United States at large, but the Trump administration is trying to make America great again, bring the world to the past. It's not possible anymore. What we see right now that the global South, not only the global South, but the rest of the world, so to speak, has gained momentum. As I said before, in Brazil, we had the tariffs, 50% tariffs against the Brazilian exports to the United States, and our trade balance had a surplus even bigger than the beginning of the year. So the world changed. And Donald Trump doesn't want to see that way. He wants to bring back to some kind of nostalgic past that the United States was greater than it is today. They need to negotiate with everyone, especially with Brazil, but not only with Brazil, but with China, India, everyone. And what Trump is doing right now is somehow trying to address a real problem that the United States has. It's the problem, I insist that, it's a problem in the current account of the United States. They need to solve that. In past situations like that, like we can see the Plaza Accord during Reagan administration, or even if with Nixon in the 1970s, the United States need to devalue the dollar to balance their trade sector. So they can't do that right now, but they need to make it more, how can I say, they need to talk with everybody. They can't do that in the one way only, as they did in the Plaza Accord and with the Nixon administration in the 70s, that they ended the golden window. That was the problem by then. So they need to talk more, and they are not. So all the time he does that. Brazil gets closer to China, China gets closer to India, India gets closer to Philippines. Everybody gets closer because we are reacting some kind of it's not well planned plan about that Trump is trying to do right now.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. To continue our conversation, we turn to the Belt and Road Initiative. Joining us now, Yersultan Zhanseitov is a sinologist from Kazakhstan. And here in Washington, D.C., Abdullahi Boru Halakhe is an Africa security and policy analyst. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Abdullahi, let me start with you. The Belt and Road Initiative investments for the continent of Africa reached $39 billion in the first half of this year. How has that initiative impacted member nations, especially in terms of communications infrastructure and, of course, as well as job creation?
Thank you so much. Let me just give you a sense of some of the top line, just so that the viewers have a sense. You have the Kenya standard gauge railway that has reduced the travel distance from Nairobi, the capital city, to Mombasa, the port city, from 10 hours to 3 hours. You've got the Maputo-Kalambe suspension bridge that has reduced the distance of travel between Mozambique and KwaZulu-Natal province from something like 4 hours to closer to 90 minutes. So in terms of some of these projects, if you look at the Africa's infrastructure deficit, it's somewhere between 100 to 170 billion. Only half of that is being supported by governments and other agencies. So for the Chinese who've come in and put in significant amount of investment, if you look around 20 ports on the continent are being financed by China. If you look at 12,000 kilometers of roads are being built by Chinese, 80 power plants in a continent where only 75% of the population have got access to electricity. These not only create jobs, it creates development, and it is a model that many African countries prefer versus the one that is predetermined, pre-cooked, and brought to the continent that have not worked since independence. So in many regards, this model is the future of development on the continent than the previous models.
Okay, let's go to Astana, to Yersultan. Yersultan, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. The Chinese President Xi Jinping, he announced the concept Silk Road Economic Belt, what we now call the Belt and Road Initiative, that was in Astana in 2013, more than 10 years ago. Central Asia saw record BRI investments in the first 6 months of this year, totaling $25 billion. Kazakhstan was the biggest beneficiary of these investments, getting $23 billion. How significant is that, and how were these investments allocated in the country?
Thank you very much. We should say that Central Asia is quite important for China. So this is not a coincidence that the Belt and Road Initiative was first announced here in Astana at the Nazarbayev University. So talking about BRI, it's been more than 10 years. In total, if we look into different sources, there are more than 260 different BRI projects here in Central Asia, and more than 100 of them are here in Kazakhstan. Of course, there are some big projects here in Kazakhstan, like power plant, like the green power plant in Zhanseitov region in southern Kazakhstan, for example. And one of the key directions in the BRI projects is transport and connectivity. We are developing the Trans-Caspian corridor, which we are calling the Middle Corridor. And we should say that more than 80% of all the goods that are being transported from China to Europe, they go through Kazakhstan. And also Kazakhstan is a key logistical point for 2 out of 6 like big strategic corridors for China. So Central Asia is very important, and Kazakhstan is a key player here in the region. As our president mentioned, during his last visit to China in the beginning of September, more than $27 billion were invested here from the Chinese side to Kazakhstan, and many more to come. The last SCO summit, the result of the last SCO summit and our president's visit was another $15 billion, and many of them are in the energy field. As we know, China will be building a nuclear power plant here in Kazakhstan. So our cooperation in BRI is expanding, and we have much bigger perspectives for the future. During the first 10 plus years, many things have been done. But I think from the start of the year 2022, our momentum in cooperation is even faster and even bigger. So I think in the future, we will be having even more China Central Asia projects, especially in the fields of transport logistics, energy, mining, and many other sectors as well.
Right, Yersultan, you mentioned transport logistics. There's a lot of work being undertaken right now to connect China with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. How important is that for connectivity in the region?
It is very important, given that those 2 countries are landlocked as Kazakhstan. If we are talking about Uzbekistan, it's a double landlocked country. So Central Asian countries are looking for every opportunities to find their ways to the oceans, to the seas, and China is a key player here. In case of Kazakhstan, for example, we have the exit to the oceans through the Lianyungan port in China, and for those countries like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, that railroad is helping to escape the isolation from the Central Asian region for both of the countries, especially for Kyrgyzstan, given that the country is not very big in the terms of territory, and it needs its transport and logistics as diversified as possible. So the Chinese part is playing the big role in transport and logistics in Central Asia now.
Abdullahi, Nigeria has benefited enormously from BRI. It became the country with the highest construction volume and the largest growth in BRI engagement on the continent. What kind of impact has this had on Nigeria?
It is significant because if you consider Nigeria, it is one of this, if you will, superpower of the continent, but also it has a significant number of people, and it's one of the most populous country on the continent. But also I think because of its energy and infrastructure, there has been a delay in how people can be, transported from one part of the country to the other. So for instance, Lagos and Ibadan and Lagos and Abuja, these transportation corridors have been enhanced to move people from one part of the country to the other. We say these are cities, but they are largely mega cities. I think in that regard, the light rail, the transport, and the gas pipelines have created some opportunities, but I think we're just scratching the surface, and these are significant areas where the Chinese investment really helped the Nigerian government to make the next step, because some of the major problems are not just the bottlenecks around the infrastructure, but also is the governance issues that if sorted with the help of the infrastructure development, Nigeria can play its rightful place on the continent. And we've seen the challenges of lack of employment and lack of governance with some of the protests over the last couple of years around the police killings in Nigeria.
Yeah, and Abdullahi, in terms of job creation, in terms of employment, what kind of progress are you seeing?
I think there are, again, with employment, a lot of these are lag outcomes, to the extent that whereas the investment has gone in the first part, the second part is now the maintenance. If you have a railroad, if you have light rail, if you have gas pipelines, the first part creates the spark of the employment, but now it's the downstream or the maintenance where things we are still yet to see some of the data come upstream for us to be able to make a good analysis. But for now, it looks really the fundamentals have been established. It is now the sustenance of that where we really need to do a little bit more digging to get good outcomes. But the start is good for now. I think for Nigeria as well as China, it is that is the next phase. And the development in Nigeria will have serious trickle-down effect, not just within Nigeria, major cities, but also in countries that are neighboring Nigeria that are not doing very well. For instance, Niger, that relies significantly on Nigeria in terms of its exports.
Yersultan, the second China Central Asia Summit that was held in June in Astana, and during the summit, President Xi stated that China is going to provide a $208 million grant this year to support key projects aimed at enhancing public welfare and advancing their development goals in the 5 Central Asian countries. What can you tell us about these, about the project and these goals?
Well, as we know, China has achieved a lot of progress in fighting poverty in China itself. So we can see China as a role model. So Chinese government knows a lot of how to solve these kind of questions, and it was first announced in the first Central Asia China summit in the year 2023, where more than $1 billion were given as grants for the Central Asian countries to help on the exact same issues. So fighting poverty, unemployment, and other issues like that is one of the key priorities in our relationship with China. So China is becoming one of the biggest donors on that issue. And I think the strategic view from Beijing is that if the region of Central Asia will be prosperous, safe, and developing, it will be beneficial for China as well, because we have the common border with the Western Xinjiang region. So the more stable and prosperous is the Central Asian region, so the better it is for China as well. So the Chinese side is working proactive and helping the region as a bigger economy. I think that this is the idea.
Abdullahi, the BRI is shifting its focus to renewable energy, to mining, and to new technologies as well. What do you make of this strategy?
I think it's not only strategic, but it's also significant to the extent that China, which, the major accusations leveled against China, if you hear, it's largely from the West, is one, environmental issues, two, it leads to a lot of pollution. Using the time frame during COVID, the Chinese really kind of slowed down some of the investment, large-scale infrastructure headline investment. After that, it switched to clean green energy. And if you look at some of the major projects around clean green energy, they are largely supported by China. And so in that regard, just to give you an example, in Kenya, the large-scale, importation of solar is largely from Chinese. Yes, Kenya is trying to work with China to have some of the assembly lines in Kenya, but if you look around, a lot of clean green, largely solar, not just in Kenya, but across the continent, is done by Chinese. Secondly, if you look at Mozambique, that we mentioned with regards to the largest suspension bridge on the continent, liquefied natural gas investment, a lot of it is coming from China. So China is not only leading in terms of large-scale infrastructure projects that were deemed, largely investing in coal and others, despite the fact that Africa contributes only 3% of greenhouse emissions. China now has switched its leading investment. If you look at Kenya, Olkaria Hydro, if you look at Zimbabwe, Kindaruma Dam investment that is bringing on board something close to 3,000 megawatts of electricity, largely from hydro source. China is leading, and it's not only strategic, but also it's a good thing to do, which makes China the largest player in green, clean energy on the continent.
Okay, and that is where we need to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.